Good afternoon, Buckeye fans. If it is afternoon when you're listening to this, if you're watching it live, it is Tuesday afternoon. I'm Patrick Murphy here with Dave Biddle. We just got back from Ohio State's third spring practice of the year. We got to watch a little bit of that, talk with Ryan Day. We're going to kind of recap some of that. So thank you for tuning in with us. If you're watching live or listening after the fact, please like, subscribe, all that good stuff. That really helps us. And if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the comment section. If you're watching live, we'll get to some of those as well. But Dave, let's start out with the practice. Now, we didn't get to see a ton. It was only 30 minutes or stretching in 3 periods. But observations you had, you already posted a practice report on Bucknuts so people can read that. But for those who haven't, what observations did you have from the practice and what do people need to know?
And not much to glean from today, right, Patrick? Basically the same as what we saw 2 weeks ago. I mean, when we're seeing 15 minutes of stretching, basically, and then the first 3 periods of practice, which for those who don't know, each period is 5 minutes long. So we're seeing, really very light drills. But, I mean, the talent does just drip off the page, so to speak, when you look at this team. All you have to do is look at the roster to see that. But you see guys out there like Tyleik Williams, who Ryan Day actually said is one of the best athletes on the team. I was noticing that his burst is so impressive. We saw that in games last year. And so there's some of the things that stand out. And I think overall they're in pretty good shape health-wise. I think that's another thing that stands out. They obviously have 9 guys who are missing spring, 7 of which are scholarship players. But all of those guys are expected back for the season. We'll see about how early Lathan Ransom can come back. But guys like Josh Proctor will be back. So I think the overall health of the team looks good. And they're just stacked, man. You watch this offense with C.J. Stroud out there, and even watching Devin Brown, the third-string quarterback, and Kyle McCord, the backup, and these running backs with Travion Henderson. I love seeing Mayan Williams out there wearing that number 3. I really think he's going to be one of the best backup running backs in the nation. And of course, this wide receiving core. You lose 2 first-round picks, and they're not going to miss a beat. Obviously, with the superstar Jackson Smith and Jigba coming back. So, I know we're going to get into some more specific topics, but those are a few of the things that stand out to me.
Yeah, I mean, other things just to note, Cameron Brown back in practice, cornerback Zach Harrison was back there. Dave, you put that all in the practice report so people can read that over on Bucknuts. Let's get into the Ryan Day part because that was probably the most interesting given what we were able to see in practice. And you got the first question, as you so often do for Ryan. You asked him about Harry Miller. For people that haven't paid attention or may have missed this, Harry Miller, the offensive lineman, former 5-star recruit out of Georgia, announced a couple weeks ago that he was medically retiring. And it's not an injury in the sense that we think of a physical ailment. It's mental health for Harry Miller, who admitted in this long post he posted on his Twitter page. You can read it on there. He contemplated suicide. He's really battled some demons while at Ohio State. And he was on the Today Show just the other day saying that actually dates back to when he was in middle school and told his mom the same thing. But he went to Coach Day. He told him this because of Ryan Day's past, kind of the situation they have at Ohio State. They were able to get Harry Miller help. What did you make from what Ryan Day told us about the whole situation? Because he was asked a few times, not just your questions, a few times about the situation.
Yeah, it was just over a half-hour press conference. I would venture to guess at least half of those that 30 minutes was about Harry Miller, and rightfully so. I mean, he was asked about Harry Miller for the last year, and he kept it under wraps as he should. And now we know. I can just give Harry Miller so much credit for what he's doing. It's so brave. I challenge anybody to watch that 8-minute video on the Today Show with Harry Miller and not shed a tear. I mean, if you can watch that and not shed a tear, you might not be human. What I find really, really cool here, well, the first thing is that Harry Miller is in a much better place, a much, much, much better place. That's the main thing. What I find exceptionally cool is the culture that Ryan Day has put in place. And he wanted to take zero credit for what's going on with Harry Miller and Harry Miller, coming so far in the last year. And he did say it's still a work in progress. It's not like this is a done deal, but, he's come a long way. But what I find really cool is that Ryan Day has put a culture in place where tough, macho football players can come and I'm sure there are some guys who still don't feel comfortable doing it, but guys now can feel more comfortable, these macho football players, with speaking out about mental health issues. And as I said to Coach Day, I don't think that would have been possible 10 years ago in our society, maybe not even 5 years ago. He put himself out there. For those that don't know, I'm sure most people watching this know, Ryan Day's father committed suicide when Ryan, I believe, was only 12 years old, something like that. Maybe he might have even been younger than that. And at first, Ryan Day blamed his just didn't understand. Thought his dad was a coward and was mad at his dad. And it took him years to understand that, no, my dad was, he had a mental illness. And then he's made that his life's work outside of football. Ryan Day has, to bring awareness to mental health. He might have saved Harry Miller's life by doing that. And now Harry Miller, by speaking out, he can, in my opinion, save a lot of lives. People can see, oh, this guy can speak out about it. I need to go get help. I don't need to keep this inside. I don't need to be embarrassed about it. So, yeah, I mean, get on Bucknuts and watch the video of Ryan Day. He talks a lot about Harry Miller, and it was good to finally hear from Ryan Day on it. And I know Ryan was being humble, but I'll give Ryan a lot of credit. He's not going to give himself a lot of credit. But it was just, heartwarming to hear Ryan Day speak about that today.
Absolutely. And if you just Google Harry Miller, you can find all you need to see about what he's gone through. It's been well documented all over. It's on Bucknuts, but it's pretty much everywhere at this point. Let's talk some on-field stuff in terms of what the Buckeyes are doing in practice, Dave. Ryan Day was asked about Jim Knowles' defense, and he was asked about kind of the installation of the Leo position. He said they've really stuck with base defense thus far. Only the third practice of spring, but at some point they're going to have to start installing this defense. It's a complicated defense. Ryan said even the Jim Knowles has admitted that the guys at Oklahoma State took some time to get to learn that. So when do you think the Buckeyes start to really get into kind of the finer details of Jim Knowles' defense? And also, how do you think that then affects the offense? We've heard, CJ Stroud's going to get a lot of different looks once they do have that defense in place. How do you think that impacts what not only CJ Stroud, but the whole offense faces once they are going against a Jim Knowles defense every day?
Well, I find this very interesting. First of all, to answer your question, I think they're going to start to implement more of the changes, that Jim Knowles is going to make, maybe beginning next week, maybe even beginning Thursday at the fourth practice, where, mixing in that Jack, that Leo, that hybrid outside linebacker defensive end, which they have not done yet, which leads me to my next point. I find that very interesting because I think we were all led to believe, and sounds like incorrectly, that the defense was just going to flip immediately from base 4-3 to base 3-3-5, however you want to look at it. You can call it a 4-2-5, depending on on what you consider that outside linebacker DN. The point is, I think it's going to be more of a mix than people thought. I think we are still going to see the traditional 4-down linemen, maybe more than we thought. The fact that they haven't even started to implement the Leo yet, and I get they're 3 days into spring practice. My point was, if they were just going to completely change the defense and go away from the traditional 4-man front altogether, I think that they would have already started to implement that. So I think we're going to see, and this is something I've heard about Jim Knowles, is that he is as unpredictable as you can get, and I love that. That's like a number one trait I want in defensive coordinator. So that leads credence to the idea that, yeah, of course they're going to do the 3-3-5, 3-2-5, or the 4-2-5, whatever you want to call it. That's going to be a big part of this defense, no doubt about it. But it's not going to be 100% of the time. They're also going to mix in some traditional 4-man front. Probably not as many like traditional 3 linebackers. They're going to have those 5 DBs out there, but you're going to have 2 of those DBs are going to be Court Williams, who's basically like a hybrid linebacker. I think he's going to have a big year. And Ronnie Hickman, who is a safety, but hits like he's a linebacker. I think those guys, Ronnie Hickman's going to be more of a sure tackler this year with that rugby style tackling. So, but yeah, Patrick, I found it interesting that they're not just completely flipping to that defense yet. Tells me that they might be mixing in more of that traditional front here and there.
Yeah, and Jim Knowles, if you go back and look at his defenses at Duke and then at Oklahoma State, it evolved. It wasn't he hadn't done the exact same thing, obviously, with his personnel and with the opponents and things like that. He's evolved. You're moving to the Big Ten now. You're going to have some bigger looks. Probably sometimes you're going to need more than just 2 linebackers on the field as well. Dave, the Leo position is one that's interesting for people. Who do you see as the most likely candidates to step into that role for the Buckeyes?
I think Cade Stover, and I know I'm not going out on a limb there. I think anybody who's been asked that question probably has mentioned Cade Stover, if not being the favorite, as being at least a candidate. And while Ryan Day, when I asked him about that today, declined to really name any names when I said who were some candidates because they haven't really, practiced it at all yet. Jim Knowles, as you know, when we met with him 2 weeks ago, unprompted when asked about that position, mentioned Cade Stover's a guy that could morph into that role. I found that very interesting that Jim Knowles, before they really even started practice, they had 1 day of practice, I think, at that point, maybe 2. when we met with Knowles. I think it was just one day of practice. It was after the first day of practice. Without anybody even asking specifically about Cade Stover, Knowles himself said Cade Stover's a guy that could morph into that role. So I think Cade Stover's a guy that's going to play there. They're going to need more than one, though. Mitchell Melton's a guy that could play there. And you could see some bigger guys play there. Jack Sawyer's a guy that certainly could play there. And they're going to mix, Knowles usually uses two different guys there that play a lot of snaps. So it's not just going to be one guy who's playing like 95% of the snaps out there. He's going to have two guys that he relies on. But I think probably Cade Stover is the leader in the clubhouse right now.
We're going to talk to defensive linemen on Thursday after the Buckeyes practice. So I wanted to ask Ryan just about the defensive line. The main question, or the question I asked, was about, everyone's talked about Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, those guys coming on as their second years, but you've got a lot of experienced guys coming back. Zach Harrison, just several guys that have played on this defensive line, maybe not as excited for fans because they've kind of seen this story before. And Ryan Day said those guys are important. But Dave, just in general, do you see this defensive line being better in 2022? Obviously, Larry Johnson, the lone holdover from the defensive staff. What do you think fans should expect from this defensive line this coming fall?
I'll be shocked if they're not better. Ryan Day himself, who seems very bullish on the secondary, finished the answer to your question with defensive line will be the strength of our defense. And it wasn't like, hey, it might be, he was like, said it matter of fact. You can tell he really likes this group. As you mentioned, the young guys coming up, and I'm as guilty as anybody of talking more about the young guys than the older guys, but that young those four guys that are entering their second year, Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Tyleik Williams, who Ryan Day called one of the best athletes on the entire team, said his 10-yard sprint is one of the fastest on the team. That includes the skill position players, talking about a 325-pound D tackle running one of the fastest 10-yard sprints on the team. And I think Mike Hall's another guy that's going to be in the mix, needs to add a little weight. All four of those guys I'm extremely bullish on, especially Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, and Tyleik Williams. But it's such a nice fusion. You have these guys that came back. Jerron Cage is now a sixth-year senior, for those that don't know. He started a lot of games, and I thought he's played pretty well. Teron Vincent finally started to come around last year. He's entering his fourth year. I think Zach Harrison's a guy that's going to be kind of like a Steve Miller, but better, where maybe you were disappointed in him his first 3 years, but then as a senior, he has a good year. And I think Zach Harrison's senior year will be better than Steve Miller's senior year in 2014. And Steve Miller had a really good year in 2014 after really being, a disappointment his first 3 years. Javonte Jean-Baptiste is another one. They're getting Tyler Friday back. You can tell Ryan Day really liked your question, and he likes this mix. They've got at least 5 guys that have been in the program that he mentioned played in the national championship game on that defense 2 years ago, 5 of them, mixing in now with this incredible group of 4 guys coming up. So a lot to be excited there with Larry Johnson and that D-line. They're definitely going to be better, in my opinion. They're losing Tyreek Smith and Haskell Garrett. But for Ohio State, you're always losing good guys. Those aren't heavy losses at all. They're going to be a better defensive line for sure.
And Ryan Wickerham asked about JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, so I threw that up there while you were talking, Dave, because I think you kind of addressed that. Let's look at a couple of the other questions here. We've got one from Nick. Is there a chance that Kyle McCord transfers or that the QB transfer deal happens next year? Right now you got 3 quarterbacks, C.J. Stroud, Kyle McCord, who's in his second year, and Devin Brown, who's going to be a true freshman on campus. I think that the situation probably works out pretty well for the Buckeyes with those 3, and obviously they'll add more as you go on through recruiting. But C.J. Stroud, very likely to leave after this year. I think the backup quarterback this year has a leg up, and then you battle it out next offseason for that starting job. But, if Kyle McCord has a really good junior year, he could be one and done in terms of a starter. How do you see the quarterback room playing out for the Buckeyes?
Yeah, I actually think Kyle McCord's going to stick around for a while, and Devin Brown. I think, obviously this will be C.J. Stroud's last year. Try and find me an early 2023 mock draft that doesn't have him going in the top 5. He's not just projected as a first rounder. So this will be C.J. Stroud's last year at Ohio State. Again, I'm not breaking news there. I think everybody knows that. So that puts Kyle McCord and Devin Brown in a good spot. And they seem to get along, which is cool too. They seem to have good camaraderie. All 3 of them seem like they're pretty good friends. And I think Kyle McCord and then Devin Brown, they will battle it out in 2023 to be the Buckeyes starting quarterback. And I don't necessarily think whoever loses that job would transfer right away. I think, with only those they'll bring in another quarterback that would be a true freshman that year. But I think those guys know, and maybe they'll be told, hopefully they don't do a 2-quarterback system. It never works. But maybe, Ryan will say they'll have an opportunity to play. And you're one play away from being the starter if you're the backup quarterback anyway. So to answer the question, I do think Kyle McCord and Devin Brown will be here at least through 2023. After that, all bets are off. 2024, let's say Devin Brown ends up beating out Kyle McCord in 2023. Then I do not see Kyle McCord here in 2024. If it's the other way around, I do see Devin Brown sticking around since he's a year younger. Kyle McCord, that clock will be ticking. If he's not the starter after his third year, I think he will look to transfer.
Yeah, and let me just correct sort of how I said that. If Kyle takes the job after CJ Stroud leaves, I think it sets up nicely. Then Devin Brown is there to take over afterwards. Both guys have talked about wanting to be here and competing and not looking ahead to playing right away or anything like that. Obviously, Kyle McCord is comfortable sitting, at least thus far. So I think you've got guys that have the right attitude there. Dave, Daniel says 2 things I'm concerned about with the defense, both pass and running, and the offensive line. We touched on some of the defense. We haven't really touched on the offensive line, though that was talked about some today. Let's just stick with the offensive line here because we haven't touched on that much in here. How do you think this offensive line is going to look this year, both personnel-wise and how that shapes up for the Buckeyes?
Yeah, we'll start with personnel, and then we'll get to what to expect. From left to right, the starters are going to be Paris Johnson Jr., Matt Jones, Luke Whippler, and then you got the DJs on the right side. You got Donovan Jackson and DeJuan Jones. Love that group of starters. Okay, and then you got some pretty solid backups. Even with Josh Fryer out right now, Josh Fryer would be the top backup, might even be challenging for a starting spot. He would be the 6th man. He's missing spring. He will be okay for the start of the season. I think he suffered a torn ACL during warm-ups of the Michigan game. Before the Michigan game, he tore his ACL. He had some type of injury in warm-ups and is missing all of spring. I'm guessing it's an ACL, not official. Anyway, Zen Michalski is a guy running at the left tackle on the second team. They're very high on him, hearing good things about him. Some of the other guys that are in there, they've got Trey LaRue as the backup left guard. They've got Jacob James as the backup center, although we were told if Luke Whippler got hurt, what they would do is slide Matt Jones over to be the starting center and then bring somebody else in at left guard, probably Josh Fryer if he's healthy. And then you have Enoch Vamahi at right guard, who Ryan Day said is having a very good spring. And then at right tackle, Ben Christman. So they're pretty good and deep up front. What to expect? I think Justin Fry is going to solve the issues of them not doing a good job in short yardage running because they were terrible last year. It was like a 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1. Felt like it might as well have been like 4th and 10 or 4th and 20 because they were terrible in short yardage. Terrible. And it led to things like throwing passes at the goal line against Michigan. And, it's just when Mayan Williams gets you down there, then you don't even give him the ball because you don't trust your short yardage running game. Leads to bad things. So I think Justin Fry is going to solve a lot of those problems, and I like the personnel here. So, but the proof's going to be in the pudding. I'm not going to act like this offensive line is going to be like an absolute wrecking crew. They have the potential to be, but I do think they're going to be good. We'll see how good.
One more, well, actually 2 more here. One quick one maybe a little bit more in-depth one. And we sort of touched on this already. Steve said, I thought 4-2-5 is a 4-man front with 2 traditional linebackers and a hybrid safety linebacker. You sort of touched on what you think the defense will look like schematically wise, but for maybe people that tuned in a little late, how is this defense going to actually line up if it is what Jim Knowles has done at Oklahoma State and other places in the past?
Right. The only consistent number is the 5. That doesn't change. It depends on how you want to look at it. You can either call it a 4-2-5 or a 3-3-5, however you want to classify that hybrid outside linebacker defensive end. So really doesn't matter. It's either a 4-2-5 or a 3-3-5. So there you go. And, that hybrid needs to be a guy that can do everything, rush the passer, stout against the run, drop into coverage. And I think Cade Stover might be that guy.
Then the last one, bit of a fun one. Dave, when you bring in G. Scott back on the BM5, people are asking. He's
we're going to try and have G on hopefully after spring ball. We'll see. He's letting things just play out. He's trying to just let his son have the spotlight, and I get that. So I tell you what, we're going to try and have G. Scott on right after spring ball. And here's another programming note for you. I know nobody asked about this. We're going to have Brian Schottenstein and Cardale Jones back on the show at the end of this month, which is, we're almost at the end of this month. So next week sometime, we're going to have Brian Schottenstein on, Cardale Jones on. By the way, Cardale is going to be throwing passes at Pro Day tomorrow, along with CJ Stroud to the Buckeye receivers. I think that's pretty cool. We're going to have Brian Schottenstein on and Cardale Jones on next week when the foundation is up and running officially. It'll be up and running officially next week. Their name, image, and likeness foundation, which is literally called the foundation. So look for G. Scott Sr. as soon as we can get him on. He has an open invitation. And we're going to have Brian Schottenstein on and Cardale Jones on later this month.
Good stuff. Yeah, I meant to mention that CJ Stroud, Cardale Jones tandem at Pro Day. Obviously, CJ Stroud still has another year before he's throwing passes for NFL scouts, but they'll be paying attention to him for sure. Cardale Jones, he'd love another opportunity in the NFL if he could, land somewhere. If this helps him out, the Buckeyes are certainly happy to do it. Well, Dave, thanks for joining me. As I mentioned, this will be archived on all of our podcast platforms, as well as on YouTube, Facebook, and I believe on Twitter as well. So if you can, subscribe on all those platforms, that does really help us out. We'll be back. We'll probably do another one of these Thursday after we talk to some of the defensive linemen, give you some of the insight we gained from that. Steve and I may even do an off-season, start the off-season basketball one now that season's done. People seem to like the one we did after the game the other day. So we'll have plenty more video and audio content. Dave obviously teased what's coming up on the BM5. So again, thank you, Dave. Thank you all for tuning in. And we'll be back later this week, Buckeye fans.